Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles and I'm joined this week by one of the Transfer podcast's most popular guests. He is the Sunday Times football correspondent, officially the best football writer in the UK, and as of last month, a man capable of cycling across Scotland from Peterhead to Ardnamurchan in a mere 18 hours. Welcome back to the Transfers podcast, Jonathan Northcroft.
Thank you. Oh, I only come on for the intros. I'm still stiff from the cycle, by the way. Still suffering from that one.
I was going to ask what state your thighs were in after that epic ride.
I tell you what, it was an incredible, leaving aside the physical grueling aspect of it, to go from one side of Scotland to another in a day and just see without becoming the Scottish Tourist Board here, but seeing our country from east to west with all the different beautiful parts of it, you know, from Speyside to Cairngorms to Ben Nevis, then to the West Coast, was just incredible. And I don't know, if you're listening and you don't cycle, I'd say one of the joys of it is you just see the world in a different way on top of a bike, and seeing Scotland from that perspective on a sunny day, rare sunny day, was just magical and worth the damage to the thighs and actually to the wallet as well, in terms of all the stuff I had to buy to get my bike ready for it. So yeah, no, amazing experience.
I would note that this charity ride was done from Peterhead to Ardnamurchan, not the other way around, so you had something to look forward to at the end of the trip.
It's funny, that was discussed, that the magic of riding to Ardnamurchan Lighthouse with the sun setting behind it would not have been equalled by rolling into Peterhead Harbour at dusk. And if anyone's been to Peterhead Harbour, they might know what I'm talking about.
I was going to make a joke about you spending lots of time at Peterhead Harbour and dusk, but I'll pass on that on.
Let's skirt around that one. Yeah.
So I tried to make up for my holiday with a big download of news on Monday's pod. Today we've got even more news for you, but we're going to have a big focus on Premier League analysis. First, and I'm sorry, regular listeners will be bored of hearing this, but the Transfers podcast is running an audience survey. We have to hit a target number in this to get reliable data. So the quicker you can complete one for us, the quicker we can stop annoying you with these service announcements. The link is in the show notes. Please fill it out. Let's start today by talking about a young talent who is expected to be a Premier League player before the end of this summer's window. His name, Hato, someone we talked about earlier in this season of the podcast. He's an Ajax centre-back, 19-year-old, can play left back or centre-back. Long-term is expected to be a starting Champions League centre-back. He's already captained Ajax. He is very much available for sale this summer because of Ajax's financial situation. They need to make money on sales, and obviously being a homegrown player, he is a perfect candidate for improving their balance sheet at the club. The asking price, I am told, is going to be a minimum of 60 million euros. They have been hoping they can even get it above that number, depending on what kind of auction they can engender amongst primarily the English clubs. There has been interest from Arsenal, Liverpool and Chelsea. Liverpool quite early on in this process, and we talked about that in the podcast. He would come in as a backup or someone to share the position with Milos Kerkez at left back and be used in centre back as cover for the starting centre backs. But my understanding is that Chelsea are most advanced on this at present. They are in direct talks with Ajax this week. I do not believe that they've made a formal offer for the player as yet, but they lead the race. And one of the reasons why they are in a particularly strong position is another bit of information I have, which is that Liverpool have decided to focus their efforts on Marc Guehi, a player who they have been pursuing for well over a year now. They sat in the background while Newcastle United failed with a series of very aggressive bids for the Crystal Palace captain last summer, with Steve Parish refusing to sell for less than £70 million at that point. Guehi's now down to the final year of contract. Pretty much wanted by every major club in the Premier League. Tottenham Hotspur also very keen. Chelsea have been keen for a long time. Manchester United, I think it's very difficult to see them actually persuading the player to come to them. So it'll be interesting to see how that resolves itself and how the player and the club play that degree of competition and how Steve Parish handles it all. Jonathan, what do you see of this battle for young centre-backs, and particularly Liverpool's focus on probably the crown jewel of the English centre-backs, given how much they've done elsewhere in the market this summer?
Yeah, it's fascinating how the jigsaw fits together, actually, with clubs in competition for the same players, and then moving the pieces around. In the case of Liverpool and Chelsea, they've been going for quite a lot of similar players this summer. Big similar models, maybe different ways of executing them in some ways. When I say similar models, I mean they're looking for the same profile of talent. Chelsea obviously are much more of a trading club, and Liverpool are retaining assets. But in terms of centre-backs, I mean, a couple of things. For a number of years, I've been told by coaches that finding young centre-backs who are able and ready to play in the top leagues is becoming almost as hard as finding number nines. It's becoming the position where it's perhaps most difficult to find players capable of ticking all the boxes because of the change in role of the centre-back, because the centre-back has to be able to build play, but has to be able to defend one-on-one duels if you want to play an aggressive game, be able to defend high up the pitch, be press resistant, all that kind of stuff. And there are just not that many candidates. So when you get players who show that capability, they are very highly valued. We've seen Dean Howson, after one season at Bournemouth, become a Real Madrid player. It's no surprise that Jorel Hato is so valued now. I mean, he's only 19, but I think played the most minutes in the European top 10 leagues of any under-19 outfielder apart from Lamine Yamal, which tells you something about his rise. And of course, being left-sided adds even further to his sort of rarity value. So that's interesting. Liverpool, you got to remember, have Ibou Konate in the last year of his contract. He is also one of Europe's top young centre-backs, but he's now at a stage of his career where he wants to be rewarded with a huge deal, and Liverpool have already spent heavy on wages in terms of retaining Salah and Van Dijk, and then in recruiting Florian Wirtz and in their other signings. So they've got a balancing act to perform. And it's no surprise to me that they are now looking at another centre-back, because they can't really... That strengthens their position all round. With they don't want to lose Konate. He's completely very valued. But if they can recruit another top centre-back, then that strengthens their position with him. They and if they have to lose him, they've already got someone there. Don't forget they sold Jarrell Quansah and Nat Phillips, who wasn't really near the first team. So they are actually lighter in that position than they were. But what Guehi's got is a lot of the things I've already talked about. He can build play. He can play in a 3 at the back or a back 4. He can play either of the two central positions. He can go out and defend wide in the wide areas if he has to. He showed at the Euros for England last year that he's got elite mentality. There are concerns I suppose, about his size. There always have been. That's the thing that's held him back from being rated as highly as some. But in terms of being an athletic, footballing, elite mentality centre back, he fits the Arne Slot profile for sure. And while Hato would have very much also fitted his profile, maybe we're also looking at the kind of blend that Slot wants to put together, that maybe bringing in another young defender, because he's already signed Gyokeres and Frimpong, maybe bringing in another ex-Eredivisie player just wouldn't be so great for balance, whereas Guehi is Premier League proven and Premier League ready. And then on the Chelsea side of things, again, Chelsea, buy a player every 2 days, don't they? But for the last 2 years, they've tended to focus on the top and the middle of the pitch. And I think the one area where they haven't really managed to nail down talent is at the back. Yes, they signed Badiashile and Disasi. Neither have really convinced, nor have Chalobah and Colwill perhaps quite developed at the pace that they'd have hoped for. So I think it's a natural signing for them. And I've got no doubts that he would enhance Chelsea for sure. I think he would enhance Liverpool, but I can see why Guehi actually makes more sense for Liverpool.
Yeah, Chelsea also in negotiations with Leipzig at present to try and sign Xavi Simons, who, again, and we flagged up in the podcast before the window started that Simons would be aggressively marketed this summer, with the expectation that Leipzig would sell him and aggressively marketed to the Premier League. And that's more of the attacking midfield kind of speciality that you mentioned at Chelsea. I think you make a very good point about Guehi, and it's something we can broaden out into Liverpool's business in general this summer, which is they're going for the top option in the market there. They get the Premier League proven element. They get an English player, so you get another homegrown player in your squad. Potential future England captain. I don't think it's unfair to say if he continues at the level he's at because of his personality and probably the position he plays in the pitch. But that's the top option in the market if they can secure it. And they've done that with Florian Wirtz, who I think was the best attacking midfield stroke forward player on the market this summer, and comes with the transfer fee to match, 100 million guaranteed, 16 million bonuses from Leverkusen. Milos Kerkez, I think there's an argument at least that he was the best attacking left back on the market. £50 million total value to Bournemouth, again a high price. They have bid the 120 million or floated an offer of 120 million pounds for Alexander Isak, so far without success, who I think you would consider to be the top Premier League proven centre forward in the market this summer. And they've just secured in his place, or potentially to play alongside him, Hugo Ekitike from Eintracht Frankfurt. We said in the podcast on Monday that we were a little bit sceptical about the fee that was being mentioned there. I have guidance from someone who's seen the documents on that deal that the actual price is 75 million euros guaranteed with 15 million in bonuses. But Ekitike was a player who all of the top Premier League clubs looked at. Chelsea, Manchester United, Arsenal all involved. Newcastle United bid for the player. Ekitike chooses to come to Liverpool. Liverpool do the deal. They're certainly taking advantage of their status as the dimension of club they are, but also as English champions. What's fascinating to me, Johnny, is that they're doing this after a season where I remember you coming on the podcast last summer and talking about how Arne Slot was going into the season with basically no new signings, apart from Chiesa, who he didn't use in the end. and managed to win the title doing that. We've talked about how that came about and the wisdom of that technique. They seem to be throwing that all out the window and going for the we'll buy everyone and build a super team. What's your view on what they're doing there?
Yeah. There's something unprecedented about this. I've been racking my brains to think of the last champion team that then just, in a way, ripped it up and then built a new squad. And it's unlike Liverpool in the sort of Michael Edwards era, if we can say that it's once more the Michael Edwards era. I know he's back in a different role, because generally there's been a rule that 3 or 4 transfers per summer are about right. So this is unprecedented. I think there's two things going on. One is, as I mentioned, Edwards came back last March with Richard Hughes as sporting director, Edwards as chief executive of football, and inherited a situation that when I say they, but Michael Edwards would not have allowed to happen under his watch, which was, the players that were no's in the last year of their contracts, but then another raft of players like Konate, only 2 years out from the end of their deals, and a squad with a lopsided profile. So there was a need to kind of do a lot of I guess structural work to the squad and get it in a better shape, better profile. What's interesting is the way they've done it. Rather than doing it over 2 windows, it's been done over this 1 window. And last summer, the incredibly brave decision, I think, was made to not do anything. And one of Michael Edwards' aphorisms is sometimes the bravest thing is to do nothing at all, but it's also sometimes the best thing. And he has made the point that for Richard Hughes as a new director of football, a new sporting director, to sit tight after failing with a bid for Zubimendi and not action a big signing was very brave of him, because he took all the flack. But it was also really clever, because what it allowed him and Slot to do was properly assess the squad and plan for this window from a long way out. So I think one of the reasons they're doing so many deals is that this is 2 years' work rolled into this 1 window, but also they've had time to plan it, because they did take stock last summer. But I think the other thing that's happening is that Slot has revealed himself to be an absolutely top operator when it comes to improving players. He's massive on one-on-one work, really heavy on one-on-one work with players, really shrewd in terms of seeing someone's abilities and profile and then finding the right role in the team for them. Ryan Gravenberch being a sort of flagship example of that. And I think that's why you're now seeing Liverpool going for a couple of players where, in the case of Ekitike, huge talent, raw, failed at PSG, a player maybe similar to Gravenberch actually in his profile when Gravenberch arrived at Liverpool, but somebody that needs developing. He's got all the tools, but actually needs developing, and they're willing to go for a player like that. And Gyokeres is outstanding, Frimpong's outstanding, but they're also players that will need some developing to raise them to the level that Liverpool need. So they're not. I think there's a willingness to back the kind of deals that they might have once been squeamish about, because there's a trust in Slot's ability to develop. And as I say, there's a lot of planning and structural work gone into this window. And of course, the other thing, they've got the money to do it, because they kept their wallet shut last summer.
Will it work? I get the rationale. I get the explanation of why they've done it this way.
Yeah.
Can you actually make that many changes and spend that much money in one window to a winning team and remain the winning team?
You know what? So the thing that springs to mind is, can it work this season? I don't know, because it's a lot to ask this season. Is it the right policy for the longer term? Absolutely, because in renewing Van Dijk and Salah was only ever a short-term of short-term benefit. So there is a need for Liverpool to evolve into a different era. And you need new players and new stars, new leaders of the team like Wirtz to do that. So will it work this season? It's a big ask, but the job Slot did last season in transitioning from the Jurgen Klopp era straight to a title-winning team, that was a harder challenge than the challenge Liverpool face now, which is to blend in a lot of new players to already a winning machine. It is a challenge, but as I say, Slot has already done something even more difficult. So I would put my money on Liverpool winning the title again. I'll say it now,
okay.
And I would stake my money on it working.
I guess the point you made first is the most important one, because we're also focused on the short term in football, and the strength of Liverpool over this last 7-8 years has been that they haven't solely focused on the short term. They've taken a medium to long term view on squad building and completely overhauled the club. And I guess you can see that what they're doing now from the perspective of they're reapplying that, but just doing it a different way from a position of strength.
100%. And what was the one significant deal they did last year? It was Mamadashvili, the long-term goalkeeping solution to when Alisson goes. So right from the start of the Edwards return, it's been a refocusing on the longer term, and it's what the top. I know I probably always invoke Alex Ferguson at all times for all sort of examples of good practice, and that's just being an Aberdeen fan and etc. But anyway, it's what Fergie was so good at Manchester United over decades, was having the foresight, the bottle to ignore the fact in some ways that he was winning in the moment, and to continually think of what's the team going to look like in 2 or 3 years. I remember Peter Schmeichel telling me once that he visited Fergie. This was after Peter had retired. He visited Fergie who at Carrington, and Fergie said, let's take a walk, and they went for a walk around the pitches, and the under 16s or under 15s, it was that around that age group, were training on a particular pitch, and Fergie pointed at one of the players and said, he'll make his debut in the League Cup in 3 seasons' time. And sure enough, that player did make his debut in the League Cup in 3 seasons' time. And he always had that eye on what's the team going to look like in 2 or 3 years. And that is what you need to be super successful. And that's the thinking that is back at Liverpool.
Yeah, and it's even harder in the modern era where we commented on this in a recent pod, where all the top clubs pretty much operating from the same recruitment list.
Yes, yeah. And I mentioned, Liverpool, the similarities of Liverpool and Chelsea. It's for different reasons, but Chelsea are focusing on the future from more of a trading point of view. They're looking at future talent that's going to be worth more than it is when they buy it for. And Liverpool are maybe looking at it from more of the sporting point of view. But as you say, it is now a cluster of clubs looking at the same options, same profile, 23, 24-year-old, next big things.
With great analytics.
With great analytics, yeah.
We mentioned Alexander Isak earlier, that 120 million floated offer to Newcastle. Newcastle say they won't sell the player, that they want to extend his contract, but contract talks have actually not resumed with Isak. Our understanding in the Transfers podcast is that Isak is unsettled at Newcastle United and would be open to leaving this summer if Newcastle United were prepared to accept an offer for the player. Newcastle United clear that they will not sell their best player. Jonathan, do you think Liverpool will continue to pursue Isak's signature? And do you think they have the financial ability to also add that scope of deal? It would be the biggest, it would be a club record deal would be a British record deal on top of all this business that they've done so far.
To take the second one first, I think they can do it. They're still trying to sell a few more of their assets, like Harvey Elliott, for example. And one thing and maybe Luis Diaz will also go. We might come on to him, but one thing Liverpool have always been willing to do is actually sell good players, because that's where you can raise money, and I think they can finance another deal with the income from a couple of sales. And yes, they're playing an interesting game with them. They're still letting it be known that they retain an interest in him. So that's saying to Newcastle and the player, look, anytime you're ready to talk, we're here, which is very interesting. But at the same time, they brought in Ekitike, so that's, that's where Edwards is so good. That's also strengthened their position because they're no longer desperate for a number 9. They've got the number 9. They've actually got a number 9 that Newcastle wanted as well. So, in the last week or two, their positions, I would say, become more powerful and Newcastle's has become weaker. But, a lot is going to depend on how Newcastle judge this situation. Isak's still got a couple of years on the contract, but their judgment has to be, if we retain this player, first of all, can they give him anything like the salary that he wants? I doubt it. But if can they give him can they stretch to a new contract or a wage improvement that's going to keep him happy? And if he's not going to be 100% happy, what impact's that going to have on his performances and on the squad? And without knowing the player well, and I don't, I'd find it difficult to call exactly which way that human side of things is going to go. But that's what, as a manager, as a coach, you have to. Those are the judgments that Eddie Howe will have to make. And I just think Newcastle are in a really delicate and difficult position now. In the middle of a window, which was always going to be big for them. It's like they've ended up reversing further and further down a kind of narrow one-way street.
You mentioned Luis Diaz. He does want to leave and is wanted by Bayern Munich, and Bayern Munich pushing offers up for him. So that could be a player that Liverpool sell well, as you mentioned, they're good at. Just to reference the SciSports estimated transfer values that we use when we're doing this analysis of Liverpool here, I was looking at where Isak stands in that, and he currently ranks 9th of all players in the world on estimated transfer value at 116.1 million euros. In the Premier League, he is only behind Erling Haaland, who's number 1 in the world at 184.2 million, and Florian Wirtz at 135 million. So I guess that gives you a sign, although none is needed, of where Liverpool's analytics are, in that they're focusing attention on players who are at the very, very top of the scale in terms of what their performance on their pitch, their contract length, and their developmental ability suggests from an analytical perspective. You mentioned this difficult summer for Newcastle United. There's been a lot of frustration involved. They've failed on Ekitike. They failed on Brian Mbeumo. They failed to get Jean Pedro, Liam Delap, Dean Hyson, to mention just the ones we know about. They're currently working on a deal for Yohan Wissa of Brentford, which is very bad news for Brentford, having lost Mbeumo, and a player who I think they genuinely have a potential to secure, given that he has 1 year left of contract, turns 29 in September, and they can offer him life-changing wages. They have managed to appoint a new technical director, interesting appointment of an American ex-Microsoft employee who was head of sports data science at Benfica, and then 3 years of head of football intelligence at Atalanta. So two top recruiting clubs in European football. His name is Sudarshan Gopaladeshkan. and they're close to taking Ross Wilson from Nottingham Forest as the new sporting director to replace Paul Mitchell. Back in the Champions League, they have potentially the biggest backers in world football behind them, but they're limited, and been particularly limited in their spend for the last couple of seasons. Those profit and sustainability rule limitations have eased a bit this summer. How big is this window for Newcastle United? How important is it for Newcastle United? How important is it for Eddie Howe?
Yeah, well, we only need to listen to Eddie Howe, really, who back in May was saying this is a crucial summer for us. And the other thing he said is speed is key. And I think he was right in both of those things. Speed is key because if you're Newcastle and you want to get some of these targets, you need to get the deals done before the bigger rivals come in and gazump you. But actually, that's exactly what's happened to them in the cases of Delap and Ekitike and Mbeumo. I'm not sure how close they really were to Howson. But what's impressive is when you look at the list of players they've been going for, something's working there. They're clearly going for the right players. And I would say a lot of these players are kind of similar to the profile of recruit that has powered their rise. They're kind of similar profile to the Tonales, the Bruno Guimaraes, Gordon, Isak. But as we've touched on earlier, Newcastle's big difficulty is that 2 or 3 years ago, they had that market, not to themselves, but it was a lot clearer for them, where the big clubs were really focusing on different profile signings. But now everyone's going for those players, and it's becoming very much a kind of food chain scenario where, unfortunately for Newcastle, they've got the 8th biggest wage bill in the Premier League. And one thing we didn't mention about Liverpool, Liverpool got the 2nd biggest wage bill of all time in English football, behind only Manchester City. So
and that's on the figures for probably over a year old now.
Yes.
Let's see what this season's wage bill is going to be like.
100%. So that's where Newcastle are, and they're really struggling to shift the dial. At the same time, they've been without a chief executive really and a sporting director for most of the summer. And I actually really I feel for Eddie Howe, because I think he overperformed with that team last year. I think over his reign at Newcastle, it's been one of intelligent building and fantastic sort of leadership. But like all coaches, he needs help, and it's not been there. The backing hasn't been good enough for him over the last 18 months, and I wonder if this will be the point in time that Newcastle look back on and think, if we'd managed to do things a different way, our club might be in a different position. I fear that when you look at the recruitment happening elsewhere, that Newcastle will find it extremely difficult to do anything like they did last year, which was finally win a trophy and Champions League. I think that'd be even to get back in the Champions League again for 26-27 already looks like an enormous ask for them.
You make a really interesting point there of how the recruitment strategy that Newcastle used to get themselves back into the Champions League and to win a trophy again is basically being taken on by almost all of the top clubs in the Premier League now, who have more resource to spend on it. And we have a summer of the kind of mid-tier successful clubs, the clubs we've all enjoyed watching overperform last season, seeing their best players being picked off more or less one by one. We go with Nottingham Forest, who finished 7th, looked like they were going to get a Champions League place for a good chunk of the season, and listeners will remember Jonathan predicting that Nottingham Forest very early on last season would be in the running for a Champions League place because of the quality of their football. But they've already lost Anthony Elanga to Newcastle, the one significant signing that Newcastle United have made, and are on the point, I think, of losing Morgan Gibbs-White because Tottenham Hotspur have alerted the rest of the league to the £60 million release clause in his contract. Whether Tottenham get him or not because of the legal issues involved there, I think it's inevitable that Gibbs-White leaves. Brighton sold John Pedro to Chelsea before the Club World Cup. They finished 8th. Bournemouth finished 9th. Milos Kerkez already gone to Liverpool. Dean Hyson to Madrid using the release clause. Ilya Zabarny on his way out. A €60 million offer from Paris Saint-Germain. Tottenham have raised that to 70 million. Bournemouth trying to persuade the Ukraine defender to choose Tottenham over PSG. And other clubs looking at Antoine Semenyo. Brentford in 10th place have lost just about everything. The manager has gone to Tottenham Hotspur with most of the coaching staff, including Justin Cochrane, who Brentford had prepared to replace Frank in the expectation he would leave at a certain point. Brian Mbeumo to Manchester United for a club record fee. Captain Christian Nurgor to Arsenal for 15 million. And Johan Visa in a very difficult to retain. And then you can go to FA Cup winners Crystal Palace, who haven't sold yet. But Marc Guehi, I think I'll be very surprised if he's still here at the end of the summer for the reasons we've discussed already. And Ebere Eze also being targeted by Arsenal and others. We haven't seen this ever before in the Premier League, have we? No. This kind of focus on taking out the players from the clubs who've upset you by overperforming the previous season.
It's brutal. It's been really brutal. And I think that we're in a situation now where I think 4 of the top clubs are set to pass through the £1 billion barrier already for transfers. And you know, as we've outlined, a lot of the business has been done at the expense of the middle tier, and it's a reminder of the Premier League ecosystem. It's sadly also echoes what's happening across football, because I think what we're seeing in football now is across different countries, the rich and powerful becoming more rich and powerful, and ever more an unchallengeable elite. And if you think about the greater amount of money now available in the new Champions League, and you factor in the Club World Cup, I think this is a pattern we're only going to see perpetuated, where the top tier of clubs are going to just get so much more revenue and so much more revenue over the years to come, that seasons like last year will just be an anomaly. And it's a systematic taking out of so many good players and coaches from this band of clubs. I mean, among the other names, you know, I've kind of got half an eye on Carlos Baleba, who I know there's a lot of interest in him. Brighton may keep him this year, but already the eyes of the vultures are on him. It reminds me a little bit of 2016 when Leicester won the title, and it kind of shocked the elite so much that we saw a complete, you know, flurry of investment. You know, in that next summer or in that next year, you had Guardiola arriving at City, Klopp getting started at Liverpool, Jose Mourinho at United, and it was like we can't let this happen again. And it refocused the top clubs on their strength and strategy. And there's a bit of that happening when you have Manchester United and Spurs finishing as low down as they did. It was inevitable in a way. The muscle was going to be brought to bear. But I'm just a bit sad, I guess, without using a more articulate word, for those clubs, and also sad for us as observers of the Premier League, because there was a joy last year in seeing so many good performances from the likes of Forest, and seeing Palace, what they're building, and winning the cup, and Brentford and Bournemouth. It's so difficult for these teams now. So difficult. You could add in Richard Hughes now being at Liverpool. They're taking sporting directors. Of course, Brighton have been rinsed for staff over the years, and Brentford are the ones that have been most filleted, haven't they? And when you add in nearly the entire coaching staff and then nearly the entire senior tier of players, that's a huge sort of asset stripping that's taking place there.
Which is one of the reasons why they have brought Jordan Henderson back to the Premier League from Ajax after Ajax released him from his contract, because they feel they need a leader and a voice in the dressing room, and someone to support the new coach Keith Andrews, because so much has been taken from the club. And we talk about Manchester United, who very much focused this summer their major recruitment on taking Premier League proven players from mid-tier clubs in Matheus Cunha and Brian Mbeumo. That Mbeumo deal concluded this week and now announced as a player, finally, for £65 million plus £6 million in bonuses. Interesting details of the process in which Manchester United operated it and why it dragged out for so long, which I think is quite telling still about Manchester United's skills in the transfer market, in that Brentford were offered £70 million from Tottenham Hotspur as part of the negotiations over Thomas Frank's exit for Mbeumo. So obviously there were extensive discussions between the two clubs at the time, and they came to an agreement with Frank pushing Tottenham, if they were going to bring in a new right-sided forward, that they should bring in one he knew and had worked with already, and they should pay a premium for him. And Brentford were prepared to accept that fee and certainly used it as a benchmark when Manchester United came asking for the player later in the window and said, we already have that offer. United initially bid a guaranteed sum of 45 million and ended up adding 20 million on top. The problem for United in terms of doing this deal was they had already agreed a salary with Mbeumo, which I understand to be around £12 million a year, which I estimate to be at least 3 times what he was on at Brentford, and had already agreed a substantial commission with the agent, which obviously played a part in Mbeumo's preference to move to Manchester United ahead of Tottenham. Tottenham were never going to match those wages. So United had the player under control from the perspective of he'd chosen them, but they didn't have the financial package under control from the perspective they'd already promised Mbeumo this huge pay rise. And if you factor that out over a 5-year period of the contract they'd hope to have the player, they've essentially paid around 30 million premium on top of what Tottenham would have done the deal for. So I don't think they've covered themselves in glory in the way they've operated there. I'm also quite sceptical about what they've done with Marcus Rashford. That's being presented by some as a success story, in the sense that they've got Marcus Rashford's wages off their salary bill, which amounts to about a £15 million saving a year, I understand. But they've allowed him to join Barcelona on loan for the season with no loan fee being paid by Barcelona. Barcelona have an option to buy at 30 million euros next summer. And I think if you play that through, if Rashford has a successful season at Barcelona, he will be able to pressure Manchester United into allowing him to leave for virtually nothing, or going back and running his contract down. So you have a player who, I think even a year ago, and we talked about this on the podcast a year ago, we were discussing whether Manchester United should cash in on Rashford as part of the rebuild for the Jim Ratcliffe era. I think even a year ago they could have easily achieved 60 to 70 million euros for a player who was not very long ago considered the most important homegrown player at the club, and they've effectively given him for free to one of their big or what should be one of their big European rivals if they were in the Champions League. What's your view of of how Manchester United have handled this summer, where everyone knows they have to get things pretty much spot on to have a chance of succeeding with Ruben Amorim.
Yeah, I don't think much has really changed in United. You've outlined some of the mistakes, shall we call them, some of the weaknesses in their negotiating tactics. We've seen this before. I think what happened with Mbeumo was quite similar to what happened with Mason Mount a couple of years ago, where they kind of got the player and then they tried to hardball the selling club, and all they did was wasted a couple of weeks and then ended up paying an overall package that was more than they probably needed to. I am quite sceptical about the draining of talent from United. Now, I know Marcus Rashford had become, for many fans, a symbol of waste and discontent. I would say some of that opinion has been formed by a negative way in which the player has been painted and has caused people to forget that this is a homegrown product. This is actually one of United's most productive players of the last 10 years. He's a link to the Fergie era. He's one of the top attacking talents in the world when he's on song, which is why Barcelona have bought him, which is why Unai Emery was keen to work with him last year, despite all the difficulties. I'm not denying the difficulties that Rashford has presented over the last couple of years and has experienced, but rather than stick with the player or do something to work with him, Amorim made a very early decision to jettison him, making the same decision with Garnacho. Now, again, you can individually debate Garnacho, but I'd remind people again, a homegrown player, young talent, sought after by other clubs, and there is something there if you can work with him. So Scott McTominay last year, another academy product.
Who then became the best player in Italy last season.
Who became the best player in Italy. A few weeks ago, there was a little bit of spin coming out of United where they were sort of trying to get credit for the fact they're going to make, nearly £14 million in sell-on fees from Elanga and Alvaro Carreras, who's just gone to Real Madrid. But another way of looking at that is that those two players are actually being sold for or moved this summer for £78 million less than United released them for in the last 18 months.
Yeah, Alvaro Carreras, so just go through this because it's quite stunning. Alvaro Carreras, a left back who's just joined Real Madrid for €50 million. Manchester United are in the market for a left back themselves. United loaned him to Benfica in January 2024 with a €6 million plus €3 million option to buy, and had a buyback clause of €18 million in the deal. They get 20% of the profit on the deal, but he's just gone to Real Madrid.
And they're still scrambling around for a left back, and they're trying to offload. They're trying to offload players again that failed in those positions. United fans sometimes say things like, I get this on social media, yeah, but McTominay was never good enough. Yeah, but Elanga was never good enough. Yeah, but what did Carreras ever do? And I just find that mad, because isn't a coach's job or isn't a club's job to develop talent and to see the potential or to know the potential better than those outside the club, i.e. the clubs in the market? Whereas it seems to me that it's the clubs outside of Manchester United who have had a better understanding of the talent United have got, because it's Forest that went and maximised Elanga. It's Benfica that's maximised Carreras, and now Real Madrid are willing to buy him. So the idea of McTominay was never good, Elanga was never good. Why not? Why didn't United develop them, play them in the right positions, coach them, get something out of them? Why didn't they see Carreras' potential? That would be my answer to that. And until they can start doing that as a club, until they can start doing what Arne Slot did with Ryan Gravenberch for Liverpool, then they're not truly going to develop. And I mentioned a couple of times losing academy products, losing players that are a link to the United way of doing things. This is a club that's lost identity over the last decade. Marcus Rashford very politely said that yesterday in his Barcelona unveiling, that, I think he said, he used the euphemism of being under transition. But I would argue United need those players more than ever, especially McTominay, right? We can debate Rashford, blah, blah, but I mean, the McTominay one still blows my mind that he was ever allowed to go. If ever a player embodied what the football club was, or should be, it was Scott McTominay. And now he's the culture bearer for another club, but he should be the culture bearer for Manchester United. So, yeah, I think, look, I have to say, I think they've recruited two very good players. I think Mbeumo and Alanga Cunha are great options. I like both of them. Maybe they have cost too much for United, but in terms of the actual players they've recruited, great, well done. But the overall picture, they're still a long way behind doing business the way that a Liverpool do or a Chelsea are able to do these days. And that's as we know, we could have had this conversation any summer in the last few years, but that's what they've got to start getting right, and we're still talking about this.
Yeah, offloaded Scott McTominay last summer, offloaded Marcus Rashford this summer, in the process of offloading Alejandro Garnacho this summer, yet they started the Europa League final with Harry Maguire, just handed the new contract extension option taken up, and Luke Shaw at centre-back, which in my view are two of the players that should have been offloaded as soon as they saw their actual ability to deliver for Manchester United. But they're the ones that are still there. And centre-back, fascinatingly, doesn't seem to be a priority for Ruben Amorim to improve in. I think you're absolutely right about Mbeumo and Cunha. Mbeumo only outscored by 3 players in the Premier League last season. The one question mark I have there is, have they recruited a player who will fit into the most rigid system in the Premier League? In that we know where Mbeumo plays well, and it's coming off the right wing, and he won't play off the right wing for Ruben Amorim.
No, and we know how he plays well as well, which is essentially with a lot of space to attack and countering. And are Manchester United going to be able to play that style of football? Or, or rather, how good is Mbeumo when they face Crystal Palace sitting behind the ball at Old Trafford and looking to hit them on the break? Is he the right profile? But I have doubts about Amorim, I have to say. It's the rigidity of the system, yes. It's also the style of football, I think, is just from an aesthetic point of view, not football I enjoy watching. Very positionally rigid and quite sort of direct, and quite defensive. It is a defensive structure that he's got. It is a defensive system. And not sure that's right for United. And he had more than 40 games last season. And I don't think the dial moved much at all for United. Style-wise, not results-wise, not in terms of individual development of players. So I have doubts. I have to say I have doubts about where it's going under him. I take on board his excellent reputation as a coach. And he's a really decent person. Good personal skills, great communicator. I know all the strengths. I was enthusiastic about him arriving at United, but what I've seen so far hasn't given me confidence that that this is going to be the appointment that United need it to be. But I'm old enough to reserve judgment and say, you'd be mad to really nail your colours to the mast. Anyone would on Amorim before seeing what it's like after a full summer of pre-season training and tactical work and recruitment. But the signs so far haven't impressed me.
So from one manager under pressure near the bottom of the Premier League. Let's move to another manager under pressure, being in charge of, in his view, the best team in Europe, Mikel Arteta, with his assessment when they exited the Champions League. We'll update on Victor Gyokeres. I think it will be for the last time after weeks of updates on Gyokeres' trenchant attempt to get to Arsenal. Sporting received a final proposal from Arsenal at 10:13 p.m. on Tuesday night, with a set of reorganised €10 million performance-related variables that were acceptable to both clubs. We told you on Monday's podcast that €10 million, which comes on top of a €63.5 million guaranteed fee. Sporting were asking basically for guaranteed variables, in that the $7.5 million of them would be based on Gyokeres playing 60 games over the first 2 seasons, or when he ticked off 20 games during those periods, $2.5 million for each of those, and $2.5 million for Champions League qualification. Those have been shifted across the duration of Gyokeres' 5-year contract, and there are some which are genuinely performance related, i.e. there's a possibility Arsenal might not have to pay the full 10 million. So the clubs are in agreement, and the expectation from Gyokeres' camp is that the deal would be completed on Friday. It's a radical change in the way Mikel Arteta has gone into this season compared to last season. Last season, he wanted to keep a tight squad, and paid the penalty for it in terms of injuries, particularly hamstring injuries to both his starting wingers, Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli. So interesting, he was advised against doing that by external friends, but went for that as a way of trying to win the Premier League and the Champions League. This summer, he's got Martin Zubimendi in central midfield, €60 million release clause paid to Real Sociedad, who actually overpaid the release clause in order to pay the fee in instalments. They've taken Noni Madueke from Chelsea for an initial £48.5 million, ostensibly as cover for Saka on the right wing. Nurger from Brentford, the Brentford captain, has come in, £10 million rising to £15 million as a replacement for Thomas Partey. They have Kepa Arrizabalaga coming from Bournemouth, using the £5 million to clause in his Chelsea contract as a backup goalkeeper. Christian Mosquera, Valencia centre-back to provide cover in defence, and they are not finished there. They still want a left winger, with conversations for players of the status of Rodrigo at Real Madrid going on there. Is this going to make the difference, Jonathan? Is boosting the squad in that fashion with some very impressive recruits? I think probably Gyokeres is the most impressive of all, given his scoring over the 2 years in Portugal. Is that going to be enough to turn Arteta into a winner?
Well, I mean, it's great, isn't it, when you're already the best team in Europe, and then you can make a lot of signings, and is it? I don't know. I think it actually all comes down to Gyokeres, or most of it comes down to Gyokeres, because as you've outlined, the other signings are essentially either replacing someone or cover. I mean, maybe Zubimendi is also a slight game changer, because he's certainly an upgrade. He's an upgrade on Partey, and he frees Declan Rice to properly play in that sort of more box-to-box style that Arteta wants. The others kind of improve the squad, and yes, that's something that needed to happen. The easing of the workload on Saka needed to happen. So as you could argue that Madueke is something a little bit different to what they had, in that he's very direct, very explosive in one-on-one positions. But it's a lot of money for a kind of bit of cover, a bit of, point of difference. I think Gyokeres, the success, the need for a number 9 is the key area, and I don't want to come across as Mr. Skeptic about all things Portuguese, but I just conscious of the fact that scoring goals in Portugal has historically not translated to success in the Premier League. When you think of, Darwin Núñez being the last number 9 to come from Portugal and not be able to reproduce that scoring form in the Premier League. Players from Portugal have succeeded in so many other positions, and it's such an incredible breeding ground for talent. But in terms of number 9s, it hasn't quite worked. Ricky van Wolfswinkel, 25 goals for Sporting, 1 goal for Norwich. Just saying. I'm not saying Gyokeres is Ricky van Wolfswinkel all over again, but what I'm saying is those numbers, brilliant as they are, if he gets close to half that output, it'll be a great signing for Arsenal. So let's see. I mean, there's a lot of qualities. The other thing I wonder about the fit, though, is that Gyokeres has excelled as a kind of one-man strike force, a kind of rampaging lone striker, whereas Arsenal under Arteta want to play a much more positional, team-orientated style where the number 9 has to link and come a bit deeper. So that's a coaching job that lies ahead for Arteta. So yeah, I'm don't know if it will work. As I said, Liverpool I think are my favourites for the title, and in fact I'd put Arsenal behind Chelsea as well this season in terms of where I guess people will finish. And this is a season that Arteta needs to win.
It's a brave judgment on Chelsea, but let's focus on Arteta. Basically, his explanation of what he's done is that last year he said the lineup was done. Give me 5 players that can finish 90 minutes. Those 5, okay, those I have to play. So he was saying he had too few bodies last season. And then his other argument is that we want to build a team like other clubs already have, where you look at the squad and you cannot really identify who is going to play tomorrow. Now,
I saw that quote. Is that really what? Do you look at Liverpool and say, I don't know who's going to play? Think you know who's going to play?
Yeah, I don't. I get his point that there's a little bit more flexibility in other teams that have deeper squads, but I think you pretty much know how teams are going to play. And I think for me, that's the problem with Mikel Arteta's Arsenal.
Yeah.
Everyone knew how they were going to play last season. And as the season went on, people got better and better at countering it.
Yeah.
And that for me is the challenge to Arteta. It's not just having more bodies. If he thinks he can go into this season upgrading the squad and playing the same way, then there's a lot of weight on Viktor Gyokeres there. And I take your points about how does he fit into the system. I think he is actually very good in tight spaces. I think he can score goals in the penalty box. But you're right, a lot of the work he did for Sporting is as a battering ram, as a guy who is on the front of the attacks, get the ball quickly, take it down the other end by himself. And he's not going to be able to do as much of that in the Premier League. So I guess the question is whether Arteta has the humility to see that what he's been working on for the last 2 seasons, and last season in particular, didn't just not work because of personnel. Yeah.
There's been a sort of what Arteta's projected over the last 2 years is I'm really, really, really close, and it's only fine margins that are denying me the success that I'm building towards. And he's been trying to get over the line using the margins, set pieces being one of them. And I share the kind of skepticism in your question. Is it fine margins, or is it more fundamental? And does he have the wherewithal to recognize that and understand that just doing the same again and hoping for something better isn't going to cut it? and buying these squad players does seem to speak to his idea that if we could have just kept players, more players on the pitch, more players fit, we'd have won the title, or we'd have beaten PSG in this mythical game where they battered them 0-3 or whatever it was. But that's not how I've seen Arsenal. I've seen them as an excellent side, an excellent team under Mikel Arteta, but a team that's not quite there, not quite killers. Possibly, the striker has something to do with that. But as you said, there's a very formulaic style of play. Coaches tell me Arsenal are incredibly difficult to play against. Structurally brilliant, tactically superb, really hard. Really admire the positioning, the structure, the way they've been coached. Arteta's coaching credentials top notch, but it's a formula, and you can counteract it. And what do Arsenal do? Time and time again, when teams are going to sit and absorb this sort of the style that they've got and ask them to break them down, and does Madueke make a difference there? Maybe. Does Gyokeres, is he able to do it in that? I take on board what you say about his close skills. He is a good dribbler, isn't he? He's a good ball carrier, not just over big long distances. So maybe, but you're also looking at the fact that Liverpool are getting better. And an interesting point of difference for me is, going back to Liverpool's recruitment, one thing that's common to it all is pace, speed of the game. Florian Wirtz, super quick in the brain, super quick feet, moves the ball very fast. Ekitike, pace at the top of the pitch. Gyokeres, extreme athleticism. And Liverpool have got themselves into a position where they can outpossess you, and they can beat you with a possession style, and they can beat you counter-pressing and over distances. And it's that lack of variety, isn't it, that we wonder about Arsenal. PSG can beat you in 5 different ways, and there's so much pace in their game, but they can also pass the ball around you. So it's that repertoire that I think you're absolutely right to express a doubt about. Do Arsenal have the repertoire to navigate all the challenges, and have these signings extended the repertoire in the right way?
It's interesting you bring up Paris Saint-Germain there, because one of the things that occurred to me looking at Liverpool's recruitment and the addition of these super fast players into the front line in Ekitike and Wirtz, fast and technically skillful. It does seem like they've looked at what Luis Enrique has done at Paris Saint-Germain and said, we'd like a bit of that. We'd like that ability to be incredibly quick on the transition and score goals that way, but also to be really able to damage you in tight spaces too. I may be wrong, but it does seem that...
No, you're right. I think you're right. And I think you're right. The 2 legs against PSG made an enormous impression on Arne Slot and the Liverpool players. They're still talking about it. The quality that PSG had against them.
And let's contrast Arteta with his former boss at Manchester City, in that Pep Guardiola is very much talking about how football has changed. He has cited for best part of a year now that there's a shift in the way a lot of teams play in the Premier League, and is giving the impression that he wants to change his team. I don't know if he's actually saying he wants to change his team to be the same as that, or to respond to it. But what certainly happened is a radical restructure of their squad. They allowed Kevin De Bruyne, arguably the most creative player for the team for the best part of a decade, to leave. Kyle Walker is gone, fundamental part of the defence. Jack Grealish, never fundamental, but certainly on his way out. And spent over €200 million in transfer fees. I think overpaid for 3 of the 4 players in the January window, and now a big chunk of money on Tijani Reinders, Ryan Ait-Nouri from Wolves, Ryan Cherky, from Leon, who's interesting. And when he was asked what Guardiola had said to him, he said, "Pep told me when you have the ball, you're free." Is that a sign of what we're going to see from this new Guardiola system? Because it's the first time, I think it's fair to say, it's the first time in his career that he has had to address that his way of playing football might not be the dominant way of playing football anymore.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And he's been talking about it for a while. And I think there was a transition underway last season, actually, starting in January with I'd say Omar Mamouche being the kind of key signing there. Yeah. In terms of transitioning them to a different style. I think it's a necessary change because he's right. It's a change that Luis Enrique recognised and, has been able to live out as a coach, because I think Luis Enrique was even more positional and doggedly possession orientated than Pep, and has now embraced within structure, but embraced freedom for players at the top, certainly at the top of the pitch. And yeah, Guardiola is making Manchester City put the money where his mouth is. I think the only thing is, and I think the signings are really good, really interesting, but they are probably the second tier, or they're probably like, if Manchester City did want Florian Wirtz, and Ryan Cherki is the number 2 option. Now Cherki's incredible talent, of course, but has been slightly less consistent in his career to date than Wirtz. I know he's someone they've wanted for a long time, but not maybe the top option in the market.
Yeah.
So, and this was somewhere high up in recruitment. Another big club had said this to me earlier in the summer, that it's mad to see Manchester City now having to go for second prize signings rather than first prize signings. But that is how the market has shifted, and it's now Liverpool that are in that number 1 slot in terms of being able to get the top. That doesn't mean that these City signings can't succeed, but it means there's more work to do for Pep as a coach to make them succeed. I think they'll be good this season without being, I think they'll still be in transition. I think they'll be good without being dominant and consistent in the way City were of old. And I think we saw that in the Club World Cup, which City took very, very seriously. To them, it wasn't a muckabout competition. They took it very seriously. They looked really good against Juventus, and they were beaten by a Saudi Pro League team because they couldn't. They got engaged in a game of transitions, scored 2 goals, lost 3, and this is where they're at. They are changing and will be a bit up and down, I think. But I like the fact that Guardiola's giving this a go, because what has he got to prove as a coach? Well, the one thing that we've always said about Guardiola is, he's done everything in the game except for be successful with a team that's not the most rich, powerful, dominant, blah 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 in its league, and now he's having to do that, and he's not managed transition in this way before, and he's embracing it and giving it a try. And who's to say he won't succeed at it because of how good he is and how good he's been? But we don't know.
Exactly. It is fascinating because, as you point out, he's had an entire career of having the strongest squad in his division and winning the league with that squad. Arguably had the strongest squad in history at the very start of his career in Barcelona. So let's see what he can do. Let's move on to a manager who's never ever had the strongest squad in his division, and I suspect never will have the strongest squad in his division, but has had a very successful career regardless. David Moyes at Everton. David Moyes very well. Jonathan. You've worked closely with him, ghosting his column for the Sunday Times and numerous international tournaments. Tell us about where he is at present, going back to Everton, entering this new stadium, working with new owners. How happy is he with what they've done in the summer window? What else do you expect him to do? The key signing so far has been Tierno Barry, €30 million centre forward from Villarreal, who strikes me as very much a David Moyes type player, super powerful, good presser, nightmare to deal with. A Spanish football expert tells me, but not the best in possession in tight spaces, and could probably be better with his finishing.
I spent a brilliant afternoon with Moyes in May, just before the end of the season, before the last game at Goodison, and we talked about a lot of stuff. And I've never seen him, I've known him a long time, I've never seen him as happy and as excited as he is now. And this is coming, later stages of his career, but the chance to rebuild Everton, lead this project, get them into a new stadium, he's looking at this 2 or 3 years as being hopefully the kind of prime finishing cherry on the cake of his career, whatever you want to call it. And he's so excited about that. And also feels such a responsibility about making sure Everton are successful in this start to life in the new stadium under new ownership. This is a legacy that he can leave. And it would be incredible to have built Everton twice, really, in that way, if he can pull that off. He's always been measured in the way he transitions teams. He's done this several times in his career with the West Ham squad. We turned from relegation fodder into consistent European team. And of course he did it first time round at Everton. And he's always been measured because if you look at it, it's not going out and making 8 signings in a summer and letting 8 players go. He does prefer to do things bit by bit. There's also been a financial aspect. He's never had the huge budget, but also I think that fits his character. So the first thing about this summer was an enormous number of players out of contract.
Yeah,
I think 13, and what you can see is him letting certain ones go, but actually keeping a few that, maybe keeping Michael Keane surprise people a little bit, keeping Ghana Guy instead of keeping Doucouré. You can just look at the choices that have been made, keeping Seamus Coleman while letting Ashley Young go. So if you take that one, he's careful not to allow 2 senior men, 2 fathers of the squad to leave at the same time. Guy's been prioritised over Doucouré because I think Guy's maybe Guy's a better player, but he's a rarer player in the terms of he excels in that particular position, and there are other options where Doucouré plays. Giving Jared Bramthwaite, getting him a new contract and keeping him has been big, and keeping Jordan Pickford if they can, and I think there's an attempt there to extend would be huge. And then I think Everton still have some capacity to spend after what they've already done. Barry's the big signing. In fact, signing a number 9, the right number 9, has probably been in Moyes' in tray throughout his entire Everton, both reigns, he was never able to really get the right number 9. Really difficult to get that in the market. And as you say, he's got great David Moyes style qualities. Definitely a player that's going to be a focus of crosses. Definitely a player that's going to play in the box. Definitely a player that's going to occupy defenders. But I think there'll be more. I think there'll be more to come in signings. I think there's a budget there, and what's being paid close attention to is evolution rather than revolution.
Which positions is he particularly focused on? He's been linked with the Bayern Munich left back, young left back Adam Asnu, and Real Sociedad's Japan winger Kubo Takefusa.
Yeah, I was about to say the wide positions, and I think centre back wouldn't surprise me, because again, that's just that. He just loves signing centre backs. And by the way, I'm just plucking that one out of thin air because I haven't spoken to him about signing a centre back, but he does like signing centre backs, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's another one. But without being facetious, keeping Keane's a sort of sticking plaster in a way, and Tarkowski has been excellent, but is getting on and coming towards the end of his contract. So yeah, something long term at centre back wouldn't surprise me. I think they need upgrading in pretty much every position, though, don't they? And that, when I talk about evolution, I think that's what we're likely to see over a couple of windows. But for now, definitely wide position. Supply, and getting the supply in the box now will be important.
You talk about the sense of responsibility he has in this transition to the new stadium. How was the job sold to him when the Friedkins asked him to come in? What was the timeline? What was the project that was presented to him? What were the expectations that he was given?
Well, I think the initial sale was help with an exclamation mark. It was come and save Everton, but that's something that didn't need a lot of selling for David Moyes, because it's a club that's in his heart. It was the unfinished business. I think this is the perfect way for him to complete his career, and I think that's how he sees it. But beyond that, once he arrived and started to right the ship, it very much has been to come in and build a club that's fit to play in the new stadium, and his ambition is to leave Everton in the position that he was able to leave West Ham, which was a club, West Ham, I think 7th, 8th, 6th or something like that in 3 consecutive seasons. Consistent European football, European semi-finals twice in a row, including winning a European trophy. I mean, imagine Everton with that. And when I spoke to David in May, he was saying to me that the responsibility of an Everton manager is to compete with Liverpool in a way. He's very conscious of the fans, and they have lived so long with Liverpool being successful, and they expect to, they're not stupid. They don't expect to outgun Liverpool in the league table every year, blah, blah, blah. But they do expect to be closer to them, and in their own way to be competitive. So, no matter if Liverpool are doing better, then Everton have to do better, is another way of saying that. But he embraces that, he relishes that. So I think the expectations, or the target for this summer, not expectations, but the target for this summer would be to get in the top half of the table.
Yeah, look, I was talking to someone who knows the finances of Everton very well, having monitored them through the whole period of the last ownership, and his sense of the way the deal was done with the Friedkins is a lot of the weight has been removed from the club. The stadium costs, the debts of that takeover has been shifted from this transition, and if they get the next stage right, then there's no reason at all why they can't consistently be in the top half of the table and start competing for European football again. And it does strike me as Moyes has been it's a very clever appointment from the Friedkins to start on that transition process.
I think so. I do think the potential's there. And if you're looking at stepping stones for the club, who else has got a track record of consistently taking teams from the bottom of the Premier League into the top half and into the European places? I mean, so yeah, there is, what I'm saying is, even if he'd never been at Everton the first time, his sheer profile makes him perfect for this job.
Yeah, the amount of experience of doing that in the Premier League is unprecedented. Let's finish. We won't do hero and villain because we already did one for the week on Monday. I'm going to ask you instead for a signing of the summer so far, and I'll start on this. I think, I'd say Estevan Willian is one I'm really looking forward to see at Chelsea with his move from Palmeiras going through it. But that was a deal that was done last summer. So to be more precise on a signing for this summer, I'll go for one of the replacements at Bournemouth. We've seen how well they've worked in the market over the last few years, and that's why they're making so much money involuntarily on transfers this summer. But they brought a very low-profile player, Adrien Truffert, 23-year-old Belgian-born France international left-back from Stade Rennais for an initial €13.5 million early on in the window. He's a player who had an estimated transfer of over €30 million on the SciSports analytics not that long ago. I first saw him bizarrely on my honeymoon when I took my wife to watch Fenerbahce in the Europa League.
Poor Jade.
And she loved it. She loved the game. But I loved watching that Stade Rennais side, which was full of talent. Truffert was one of the standouts alongside coming off the bench, a very young Desiree Doué. So watch out for Truffert and see if he can fulfill that potential in the Premier League this season. Jonathan, who's impressed you so far?
Well, look, you've given a brilliant sort of connoisseur's choice there, and I don't think I've got anything, maybe quite that perceptive. I think I'm going to say something very obvious, which is I just come back to Florian Wirtz being an incredible signing, an example of a Premier League club going out and snaring the best young talent in a particular position in the world, and we don't see that very often. We don't, even now. And Liverpool were able to do it. When is the last time that happened? Maybe it's what City getting Haaland. So I just think that's an outstanding signing to pull off, and I think it'll be hard to top it. But I'm glad you mentioned Estevao, because he'll prove to be a great signing. I also just looking at João Pedro and thinking, my God, have they really managed to pull something off there? Because João Pedro wasn't being looked at by, yes, Newcastle were in, but and Arsenal, for example, weren't. And I just think he looks like an example of a player who, given a bigger stage, becomes that bigger player, if you know what I mean. I liked him a lot at Brighton. I liked the talent. And at Watford, you could see the player, but a player that maybe a bit ragged and inconsistent at times, but very impactful at others. And just the glimpse of him at the Club World Cup suggests that Chelsea stage is going to elevate him as a footballer. And if he does, they will. They've needed somebody in that position for a long time, and Nicholas Jackson didn't quite do it. I don't think Delap will quite do it, but maybe Pedro. Should we be giving Chelsea credit for 2 of their 5 million signings being good? Is that just playing the odds? I don't know, but I'm going into the season now thinking, is Pedro a real difference maker that we maybe hadn't foreseen? So I like that signing.
Yeah, look, I have noticed that Madueke and Georgi Petrovic, who they've both sold to other Premier League clubs this summer, have gone for roughly double what Chelsea signed them for. So I'm sure the Americans would be saying, look, that's how great our strategy is. it's coming to fruition now. And of course, they're world champions, the best team in the world, according to Gianni Infantino and Donald Trump. I also like Jean Pedro a lot. And I agree with you. I think that's an intelligent signing from Chelsea, and I think he's actually someone who looks like they've signed to fit the rest of their attack, as opposed to just, he's young and we think we can make a profit on him down the line. There seems to be a bit of team building there. Might be by accident, but it looks like a bit of team building. I wasn't going to remind you of who you chose last time.
Oh no!
I asked you to do this.
Was it Nicholas Füllkrug?
It was.
I was hoping like nobody'd remember that, but of course you do. Yeah. All right. Okay.
I thought you were on really safe ground with Florian Wirtz, but now you've brought Pedro into the equation. I'll just flag Füllkrug that one up to the listeners.
What a dreadful call Füllkrug was. Although I didn't kind of factor in Lopetegui having absolutely zero focus in terms of the style he played. I thought they'd just be slinging balls into the box for him, and whatever Lopetegui was trying to do, Nicholas Füllkrug wasn't part of those plans. Okay, that was a bad one. I was going to just mention Habib Diarra at Sunderland. I think that's a really good one. Quite expensive, 30 million from Strasbourg. And maybe this is recency bias because I saw him for Senegal against England and he was fantastic, but just looked really good athletic profile and quite a technical player as well. And Sunderland have a huge job on to try and stay in the league, but I think they've signed ambitiously and quite well so far. And the other one that just looks to me like a good value signing is Sean Longstaff at 12 million for Leeds in terms of what they need. Because you're getting more than just the player, you're getting the experience and the character, and that is probably what they need to try and stay in the league. So, I just wanted to give a shout out to the promoted clubs and the business they're doing, which looks quite reasonable so far.
Great value as always, Johnny. You've given us 4 names, and hopefully in a year's time we'll be reminding our listeners of them because they'll all have had exceptional seasons for their new club.
Yeah. And Füllkrug will have won the Ballon d'Or, and I'll be going, well, you see, it was just a season out.
Yeah, David Moyes will sign him in January and put him in the correct platform for his talents.
There you go.
Thank you, as always, for joining us on the Transfers podcast. Enjoy the rest of the window, and we'll hopefully speak again soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Duncan.
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com. Don't forget our audience survey. Once again, the link is in the show notes, and please help us out with that so we can stop talking about it. If you liked what you heard on the show proper, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter, Blue Sky and TikTok address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Jonathan is at J Northcroft. Our production is by Marc Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Marc Caulfield and David L. And thanks to everyone who's said how much they enjoy David's outro music. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
Can't go. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go.